In this comparison, I start with the smart section, first showing you its remote controls. HISENSE is much larger, although the design seems somewhat more elegant to me. It has more keys. Let's say that it is not so comfortable to hold, especially for a person with small hands. But at least it has one thing that I really like, and that is that some keys are backlit. When the remote control is moved, or for example, if you have it on a table or bed and you grab it, some important keys automatically backlight, which can be very useful for the vast majority of users. While the Samsung remote control keys do not have this function, although the Samsung One remote has the advantage that it is much smaller, much more ergonomic or comfortable to hold, and can also be charged via a solar panel or via a USB Type-C port. Returning to the smart section, the HISENSE operating system is Android TV with a Google TV customization layer. For many, it is a great advantage because it has to do with having a greater variety of applications. And in addition to being necessary, you can install APK files. While the operating system of Samsung and all Samsung televisions is Tizen, typical of this brand, you cannot install APK files for obvious reasons. The extension would be TPK, and although external files can be installed, until now very few developers focus on applications for this operating system, which is why the applications of the Tizen operating system vary a lot depending on each country, each region, and let's say that there are not so many compared to Google TV. The fluidity of the operating system on both televisions is very good. It is not stressful. Both models have these menus for shortcuts. However, let's say that the advantage on the part of the Samsung is that the location of these icons can be easily modified, while in the HISENSE menu this is not possible. In the HISENSE menu, you can only add or remove icons. They cannot be moved. Let's say it is a slight limitation, although perhaps for some it is not so relevant. I want to tell you that although it may seem obvious, the operating system of Samsung televisions does not have a Play Store, and the Play Store cannot be installed in any way. I remind you that the operating system is Tizen and the file format would be TPK. It is not an APK as it would be on the Google TV of the HISENSE and other models. It is also good that you know that both televisions have the ambient mode function in case you require it, and I know that it can be useful for some users. You should know that on the HISENSE the screen sharing function is possible, but on all occasions I have always had to use the Google Home application as an intermediary. You should also know that the latency is often not the best, although it can also depend a lot on the strength with which your television receives the Wi-Fi signal, and also both devices must be connected to the same Wi-Fi network. While on the Samsung you have the advantage that the screen sharing function and the multi-view function are available, while the multi-view function on the HISENSE is not available. Furthermore, if you also use a smartphone of the same brand with your Samsung television, this function can be carried out without the need to connect to a Wi-Fi network. As for graphic quality, I start with what is most important from my point of view and from the point of view of the vast majority of users, which is performance in dark scenes, especially when there is some type of high dynamic range technology. Both models have an LCD screen that is liquid crystal with vertically aligned pixel configuration, or what is commonly known as a VA panel, and the backlighting technology of both models is full array direct LED with mini LEDs and local dimming, or simply known as mini LED backlighting technology, and of course both have local dimming. They have a very good number of dimming zones. However, there is something very important that I want to mention, is that in the HISENSE, although in all image modes and in all scenes you can perceive a greater level of detail, you can also perceive a greater amount of effect. Blooming, especially when there are subtitles in the scene, while in the Samsung, although with some image modes a good level of detail is perceived, and with other image modes the level of detail is not as extensive as in the HISENSE, I do want to highlight that the level of blooming effect is very minimal. It is almost imperceptible or almost zero in most cases. So as I have mentioned in other videos, you have to choose what you prefer more. If a higher level of detail but a little more blooming effect, then go for the HISENSE. If you don't mind having a little less level of detail but you can't stand the blooming effect, then go for the Samsung. And I always find some comment that tells me, but in the Hisense you have a very good level of details, you can't criticize it. Well, not everything is perfect, as I told you. There is a better level of detail, but there is a greater intensity of the blooming effect. There is no doubt about that, and if you are very demanding, it will bother you, as is my case. If you are not very demanding, or if you don't even know what the blooming effect is, most likely you won't even notice it, or at least it won't bother you. Now we go with the scenes that have color, first showing you the color saturation capacity that both models have, taking into account that the technology is quantum dots. The capacity is very high in both models, being a little higher in the Samsung, but high enough in the Hisense. I'm just showing you what both models are capable of in this area. In addition, televisions have an extra parameter that provides them with even greater capacity for color saturation or vividness. As I tell you, they are, let's say, complementary options. They are not mandatory. They are only optional, and I am only showing you what both models are capable of in this area. I am not telling you to increase these parameters to the maximum capacity. I also want to tell you that it is more or less important that you know that both models have a parameter to improve the graphic quality when the content is in SDR or standard dynamic range. In the case of the Hisense, it is called HDR intensifier, and in the case of the Samsung, it is called automatic HDR remastering. I remind you that this parameter is also optional, and what it does is improve the contrast, the vividness of the colors, and in some cases the level of details. In general, in terms of color accuracy, both in standard dynamic range and in high dynamic range, Hisense televisions do not usually come very well calibrated from the factory. In fact, on some occasions you can perceive slightly washed out, slightly whitish colors, even more noticeable when compared to a television that is better calibrated side by side, as is the case, for example, with the Samsung. But I have always said that when it comes to colors, it is a matter of taste. In fact, it is very likely that some people like the results perceived in the Hisense better, while others simply like the results perceived by the Samsung better, regardless of the image mode used. Of course, on both models you can apply image settings to your liking, or you can pay a calibrator to bring a probe and do a professional calibration. But obviously that will cost you more, and I know that the vast majority of people are not willing to pay that extra money, which is why I always show the results in the comparisons as they come from the factory. It's also good for you to know that the Hisense supports Dolby Vision high dynamic range technology, while neither this nor any other Samsung television supports that technology. For the majority of people, including me, it is not a problem that a television does not have Dolby Vision, but the vast majority of users like that, their model does have that technology, especially, and let's not lie because it has a nice, elegant or pleasant name, but the vast majority of people don't even know what it is. And although in theory it promises a lot because it has dynamic metadata that adapts to each scene, improving the level of detail. In fact, some people find the abrupt change in brightness annoying that can be seen, perceived on the vast majority of occasions. In addition, you will be more than satisfied with HDR10, which is the most common high dynamic range technology, and which of course is available on both Hisense and Samsung and on all televisions that are compatible with HDR. I'm telling you, I've been able to review and compare so many televisions, but I know that many people think otherwise. I also want to tell you that on some occasions, the activated local dimming can also affect these types of color scenes on the Samsung, making the level of detail not the best, but with some configurations or in other image modes, the level of detail is better. You should also know that the gray color uniformity on both models is good with little dirty screen effect, which is great when watching sports or a lot of high color volume content. The image scaling in both models is very good. For this I used the movie image modes with content in standard dynamic range. Here you can see that in the HISense, simply with what comes from the factory, you see a result that is too washed out. And although some settings can be applied, it is not much that improves, while in the Samsung you see that the result in terms of colors is better. As for image scaling, as I told you, the result is very good in both. Just remember that no TV will show you 4K results when the content resolution is too low. You should also know that the viewing angles are not good in any of these models. In fact, I could say that they are terrible, and I would tell you that it is normal because they have VA panels. Therefore, they are not the best options for watching a soccer game, playing video games, or watching a movie with family or friends who must sit around these screens. For the gaming area, the most important thing you should know is that on the HISENSE you will have 4 HDMI ports, but only 2 of them will be compatible with 144 Hz in 4K and also with 120 Hz in 4K and also with VRR variable refresh rate technologies. Even if there are only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, it will be enough for the vast majority of users. Although the number 1 HDMI that has EARC enhanced audio return channel, it could also be considered as HDMI 2.1. While on the part of Samsung, its 4 HDMI ports are HDMI 2.1 at full capacity, compatible with 144 Hz in 4K, also of course with 120 Hz in 4K, and also with VRR variable refresh rate technologies. And if perhaps you don't know what VRR variable refresh rate technologies are for example FreeSync or G-Sync, what they ensure is that there is no effect known as screen tearing or screen tearing, which what it does is that there are suddenly horizontal or vertical lines that deform the image, because for example sometimes the frames of the video game do not match exactly with the refresh rate of the screen. Therefore, variable refresh rate technologies come into play here so that they adapt in a variable way, for that matter, in real time, so to speak, to the frames of the video game. It is of course very important that you know that both models have a game mode that, in addition to improving the overall experience, also has the ability to show us these game bars where you can have access to these extra image modes so that you can change the graphic settings quickly without this negatively affecting the gaming experience. But you must keep in mind that in the HISENSE, first of all, you have to do 2 extra steps if you have not done so already, and that is to improve the HDMI format as I show you, because sometimes it comes in a standard format and will not allow you to enjoy the best gaming experience possible with the technologies that this television has, while in the Samsung what you simply have to do is activate the game mode. Many times it is activated automatically, but sometimes you have to do it manually. And in the case of the HISENSE, you also have to activate the game mode after improving the HDMI format, as I have shown you. And in this way, as I show you, you can add the icon for the game bar. The game mode on both televisions will also of course allow you to enjoy the best and therefore lower input lag times. I consider that the result on both televisions is really very good. It is also incredibly important to mention the following to you, and despite the fact that both models have VA panels and very trained gamers often perceive a lot of ghosting effect with this type of panels, I can personally tell you that I did not perceive a ghosting effect in any of these models. Although I must say that I am not a demanding or dedicated gamer, but rather an occasional gamer. But I must say that in other lower range televisions I have perceived some ghosting effect, and if I compare them with these 2 televisions that could be considered mid-high range, at least as I told you in these 2 models, I never perceived a ghosting effect. So in general I can tell you that any of these 2 televisions for this gaming area will be more than enough. The difference is simply in the number of HDMI 2.1 ports that you require. As I told you, in the HISENSE, even though there are 2, it could be more than enough. But if you need to have 4 ports at full capacity, go ahead and go for the Samsung. To finish, I'll talk to you about the performance of the speaker system of both models. In this case, let's say that the comparison in terms of audio is a little more unfair, because it is true that depending on the sizes, performance can vary a lot. The larger they are, the more power they will have in most cases. And in this case, it is perceived both in theory and in practice, but I must highlight that although the QN90D in this case is 50 inches, it still seems to me to have very good power and very good sharpness. But it is true that obviously in the HISENSE the power is better and the clarity is also very good, and it also has a small subwoofer integrated in the back that allows for more bass. In the end, I will leave you with this audio comparison so that you can more or less perceive the differences and realize more or less how they could turn out in real life. Finally, in terms of conclusions, I would tell you that If you can find both models in the same size at a similar price, buy the Samsung only if you are very demanding regarding the blooming effect and want to perceive almost zero of that effect. For everything else, I must be objective, and the HISENSE will most likely suit you better even if the factory color calibration is not the best, because in terms of brightness they are really very similar. The performance in dark scenes, let's say that although it has some blooming effect, it has a better level of detail, and many people care more about that aspect. It has a slightly more powerful speaker system. It also has the Google TV operating system, which for many people is more relevant or important. And also in the gaming area, it has everything, even though it only has 2 HDMI 2.1 ports. And it is also usually a little cheaper in the vast majority of countries. I don't know what you think, which model you prefer or which model you would buy and why. Please let us know in the comments box. And if you like this video, I invite you to please click on the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I also remind you that you can support me either through VAKI or Patreon or by making purchases through the referral links that I leave in the description. Without further ado, I'll say goodbye. See you next time, and I'll leave you a comparison of the audio system of both models.
The swarm brought ruin to our world. The swarm brought ruin to our world. Our proud people became refugees. Our proud people became refugees. Could not shatter our unity. And yet, they could not shatter our unity. For we are bound by the color, the sacred union of our every thought and emotion. For we are bound by the color, the sacred union of our every thought and emotion.